let's talk about hormones. Hormones, are we like, you're talking about an animal. So an animal has hormones.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we talking about here?
So it's really, and we'll kind of get to that. That's a good point. But basically, steroids and hormones have been approved for use by the FDA in beef and lamb since the 50s.
Oh.
And these include not just natural estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, the sex hormones that we talk about, but also synthetic versions of them. So they are legal, and they've been legal in beef and lamb in particular. They are not legal in pork and chicken sources. The exact rationale for that, to be honest, I couldn't quite find. I was interested in why, but those are the rules. So you're allowed in beef and lamb, and believe me, these companies take that and run with it.
Yeah.
But you are not allowed in chickens or in porcine sources.
Interesting. Okay. And you said these are sex hormones and synthetic versions of those sex hormones.
They're all legal, yes.
And
what specific companies do or whatever is up to them, but they're basically, what they do is they give them ear implants.
Okay.
So what it does is release a slow, consistent, constant dose of those hormones. Helps them grow.
Okay, so it's just like anabolics in bodybuilders. Yep. They put on more meat.
Increases the growth rate. There's more meat per animal, and also it helps them to produce that meat more quickly. Increases the efficiency by which they convert their feed into meat. It's a money thing for sure from that standpoint.
Just going to say it makes sense economically. I can understand why they do that.
And then also with females, you're trying to manage reproduction.
Oh, yeah.
So then hormones are used for that purpose too. So it is not only out there, if it's non-organic, it is 100%.
You can just assume.
You can assume, yes.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay. How does this affect the animal? I mean, we've got meat, we've got dairy. It seems like those are kind of separate conversations. Mm-hmm. What are the differences there? What are we talking about in terms of, are we talking about meat at the moment?
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. So I think what's important to understand, and you touched on it at the beginning, there's no such thing as hormone-free meat. There's no such thing as no hormones in meat.
Sure.
Okay. It's not accurate. It's not biologically possible because all of those hormones are circulating. So really what you're evaluating is, okay, naturally the level would be here. There you have this implant. We know it's increasing. At what point are we sure that increase, whatever it may be, is harmful? So that's ultimately what you're trying to determine. So, if you see things, sometimes it's smaller farms, it's smaller stores, whatever it is, and they're saying that there's no hormones, that again is impossible. And we'll get to, it seems like it's just a semantic difference, but in terms of their advertising and things like that, it does matter. Those things are impossible. Needs to be no hormones added, raised without added hormones.
Okay, so we're talking about
those terms.
Yeah, so exogenous hormones.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes. And remember, organic is going to guarantee these things we're talking about with antibiotics and with hormones. Non-organic can still have one or the other component. So
sure.
It's still just important to know. You say, well, it's not organic. Well, you know what? For whatever reason, you're not so concerned about the antibiotic issue. It's labeled as no added hormones, but it's non-organic. It's still ultimately getting what you want if that was your concern.
Got it. Okay. So there are kind of shades of gray here. Okay, so you mentioned synthetic and naturally occurring versions. Not naturally occurring, I guess, but there are exogenous hormones, but there's synthetic versions and there's I don't know, bioidentical versions. Is that what that is?
Yeah. Ultimately, though, what matters is what would be found in the meat.
Okay.
So some specifics of that. Again, like I talked about, there are levels and limits. So this was interesting, but when you look at estrogen activity, again, this isn't going into all the other possible things. This is estrogen activity in common foods.
Okay.
So they measured it. All these numbers will be, just for the sake of being thorough, nanograms per 500 grams. All right.
Okay.
1 million nanograms in soybean oil, 300,000 nanograms in white bread, 100,000 nanograms in peanuts, 12,000 in cabbage, 65 in milk.
Okay, wait.
Yeah. I figured this would be, 1 million in soy, 100,000 in peanuts, 300,000 white bread, 65. I'm not forgetting a digit there, in milk.
So there is fractional, like tiny relative amounts of, you said estrogen.
Estrogen activity, yes. We'll get to maybe some more details, but that's critical to know.
And is that in the hormone given animals?
Yeah. So in pregnant cows, it's 700.
Okay, that makes sense.
Beef from implanted cows, so they're not only being treated, but they're getting that consistent dose, is 11. Non-implanted cattle is 8. So a very small difference in terms of this study anyway, what they found moving forward with what actually it's doing to those levels.
Okay. So, if I understand what you're saying, having my tofu white bread sandwich is going to give me a whole lot more estrogen than eating a hormone fed cow.
Correct.
That might be pregnant at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Wow. So if that's not going to have any effect on me, why is that a concern?
So ultimately, again, just remember that we're talking purely about estrogen. Typically what's going to be given in these cows has testosterone. You're looking for that anabolic growth. So, there's still other issues to look at, but that's one thing that has been at least published that we know for sure. And I think is important in this case because you're also comparing it to other foods. So you may be making these hardline decisions on meat, which is great. But what about some of the other things that you're consuming, namely the white breads and things like that? There's nothing wrong with peanuts in general, but just be aware if what's the mixing of all these foods that you're consuming.
Right. And eating, what did you say, 500 grams was the measurement? 500 grams of peanuts is a lot of peanuts.
Yes.
So
that is, that's a great point. This is not relative to serving size. This is relative to 500 grams. So when you think about 500 grams of milk, that's a pound of milk. Trying to think of how you would have to term that, but think about a pound of cabbage. So when you look at it, how much? That'd be a lot of cabbage.
I can eat a lot of cabbage.
Been prepared with like seeing with that. Whew. So yeah, that's critical. A lot of times in presentations like this, you want to see kind of standardized amounts and standardized serving sizes. Yeah. Which in this case, so yeah, take that with a grain of salt in terms of the specifics. If you're looking at multiplying factors, definitely, but it's meant to give you the general feel of at least estrogen wise, what's going on there.
Okay. So that's estrogen. You said testosterone is different because that's what they're being given primarily.
Yeah. And what's also interesting is that, like we mentioned, testosterone levels would be critical to know here because, that is a pretty significant component of what's going in those implants. I cannot find specific data on how much testosterone would be. So it seems like kind of one of those things. Very interested in seeing the estrogen kind of putting out maybe a little more positive data relative, but I cannot find anything on testosterone. So if we find that maybe after the show, we could link to it because I do think it's important, but I was not able to find it.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So why would estrogen be used if testosterone is what's used primarily for making the cow get big so we can eat it? Why, other than you said
it's more about the reproduction.
Okay.
And also still important to, when they are given testosterone aromatizes. So basically that just means it converts into estrogen. So there's some increase in estrogen, whether you're a man using testosterone exogenously or a cow, that there's going to be some carryover, some conversion. It's interesting always how much. That's what's really important. Estrogen also would be used particularly in the kind of reproductive concerns with the females. So yeah, it hits on both ends there. Interestingly, the United Kingdom does not allow hormonal treatments at all.
At all.
And again, theoretically, we get why, hey, I don't want hormones, and that's why we're doing this. So that all just kind of makes logical sense. It's the data that leaves it a little more gray. Yeah. But they do not allow any hormonal treatments in beef. And they also do not, and remember, we don't allow it in pork and chicken. And they also don't allow any prophylactic antibiotic use either.
Wow.
So I think that's important relative to other countries who, we kind of respect what they do in general sense. And they tend to be, for better or worse in a lot of those cases, a little more regulatory in the sense of how they handle natural health kind of thing. So it ends up kind of dovetailing with us quite often, because with supplements, they tend to be a little more pro supplement,
right?
Recommended more there, related to chemicals that can be used. Like if you ever look at, a Mars bar or something that's produced in America versus what's produced in Germany,
right?
The ingredients they can't use. So from that standpoint, I'm certainly not, pro, increased regulations, but in terms of food and supplements, usually aligns kind of my general feeling on things. So in issues like this, I'm always interested to specifically look up what they're doing in the EU or UK. So that was very interesting to me. Now, what I tried to look up was exactly why, what made them make that decision.
Yeah.
And I could not, again, find the hard data with it. And I don't want to present something that's not comfortable with where it comes from. So,
well, okay. So that's good though. This is all verified, confirmed research that we're presenting on these things, so people can make their own decisions.
Yeah. So again, UK conventional standards, so just to be legal, is essentially related to these two hormones and antibiotics, is the same as our organic standards.
Wow.
When you put it in
those terms.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a study done by Hartman and his group that they say that meat does not play a dominant role in our daily intake of steroid hormones. So no matter what the hormone is, they also looked at progesterone. So in terms of it coming from meat, they did not find that there was a significant impact. So kind of goes along with what we, were saying there.
That makes sense. I mean, 500 grams of meat that's a most of a day's serving.
Yes.
So that would make sense that wouldn't be a huge impact. So we're talking about testosterone and estrogen, and you said it's the estrogen is primarily used for reproduction. Does that also play into dairy? Because that's part of the reproductive process.
Yes, exactly. So there was another study that did touch on issues related to hormone-related cancers. And I kind of want to start with this because it is critical related to the dairy issue, because we are concerned with, hormones that we're taking in from these sources.
Absolutely.
So there's no doubt that we have an increased incidence of hormone-related cancers. So what I mean by that is that there are the types of cancers that affect the breast, the endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus, ovaries, testes, even osteosarcoma. Their cell proliferation, their cell growth is driven by, whether endogenous or exogenous, is driven by our sex hormones. Testosterone in the case of testes, et cetera. Obviously estrogen in the case of the female related. So that I'm not trying to get to the point that dairy is doing it, but I want to get to the point that it is multifactorial. So we know there's an increase of these types of cancers, but we also know that xenoestrogens, bisphenol A, phthalates, all those things in our plastics and water bottles and detergents and pesticides and perfumes, those all go into that. Hormone treatments. We do have a lot of people, treating maybe a little more not totally by the book in the sense of diagnosis, but the level is a little low. I'm not saying that's bad.
Right.
We do it. It's just risk reward, like everything. So that's been an increased thing over the past decades. Plant sources, like we talked about, there are plenty of plant sources of estrogen-like activity. The other interesting one is, that we don't really think about, is fat and adipose tissue itself. Remember, adipose tissue itself has an endocrine function. Your fat increases estrogen levels. It aromatizes testosterone in both males and females. It increases. So we know all those things. We know obesity rates are higher. There's more adipose tissue. We know there's more plastics around. All those things I mentioned.
Right.
So it's multifactorial, but dairy can be something that contributes. And I would say contributes more than the meat itself.
Okay.
So there's a study by group HANDA. They looked at cancer incidence in 5 continents, and they also stated they are most concerned with milk and dairy products, namely because the milk we drink is produced from pregnant cows. It's really just about that time to keep them moving, keep more cows being produced. It's an economic thing.
Yep.
And again, they're relating it, like I mentioned, to all of those kind of sex hormone driven types of cancers.
Okay. So that's how hormones are coming into this thing when we're talking about dairy is because of the milk production.
Yes. So
you're saying that this might be or is one of the factors in the increase in sex-related, hormone-related cancers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So
just again, one of the factors. And I think it's important to touch on what the differences in dairy, just real quick.
Yeah.
Milk is essentially like concentrated, those hormones, and get concentrated 5 times the amount of the activity of estrogen activity, of hormones activity broadly is the way they quantified it. In cream and cheese, 10 times the amount in butter. But like we talked about with serving sizes, how much butter you consume versus drinking milk. So, take that with a grain of salt, but it is definitely more concentrated and kind of moderation with everything.
Right.
The other thing that is critical is that when we're talking about milk, and there's some relation to this in meat, but it really hits with milk, is that there are not just sex hormones. It's not just estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. There are other hormones and proteins in milk that contribute to negative health effects on the body. For example, insulin-like growth factor. IGF-1 can increase testosterone. It also manages the effects and has effect on growth hormone in the body, helps to modulate and manage those effects. Prostaglandins are involved in clotting. There's 2 to 4 times higher level in milk, levels of prostaglandins in milk than there is in blood plasma of these animals. So it's much higher concentrated. Again, because what
it's intended for.
Exactly.
It's meant for a baby cow.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that it would need all, IGF-1 and it would need those clotting factors. That makes sense.
Exactly. Also, IGF-1 itself, I mean, we just mentioned that, estrogen and broadly sex hormones can contribute to those types of cancers. IGF-1 itself is positively associated with risk of breast cancer in men and prostate cancer in women. So crosses both sexes in that regard.
Okay.
There's also gut permeability. So just general health. IGF-1 increases gut permeability, which leads to increased risk of other types of diseases that are crazy on the rise.
Yeah.
Celiac disease, Crohn's, those types of diseases. Where are these coming from? And again, I'm not saying it's because you ate cheese and because it's multifactorial. There are other exposures. There are other ways wheat's grown. There's so many different things you can go into. But in terms of looking at possible causes and contributing things that are adding together, that's one of them. Prolactin is involved and is produced in response to the milking stimuli. So you've got a cow, obviously, getting those stimuli, and it's pushed out and is found in the milk. That has broadly a significant inflammatory effect in humans. Again, they compared it to levels. They compared the levels of prolactin in meat versus beef, significantly higher in milk.
Okay, but we've been drinking milk for thousands of years, animal milk.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's changing? Is it the supplementing with the hormones? Is it the fact that we're just eating more of it? Is it what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, like we talked about the kind of the multifactorial approach. We're not directly saying that any one thing, but here's one thing that's definitely has changed. Recombinant bovine growth hormone, RBGH, and also recombinant bovine somatotropin, RBST. They are given to increase milk production. And they have found, again, this direct relationship that the levels of those hormones and in milk, they even just also have looked just directly at the results. Higher levels of prostate, breast, colorectal cancers have been found.
So if I have higher levels of those in my system, the only reason I would have a bovine hormone is because I've been eating bovine products.
Correct.
I have a higher risk of those cancers you just mentioned.
Yes. And the other thing, this was a study, they kind of deduced this. They didn't tell you exactly why, but I'll just read it point blank. This study suggests that the increase in IGF-1 may not be specific just to cow's milk, but may be caused by protein, minerals, and other factors in milk unrelated to RBGH. So they're basically just saying that, and they were looking at our RBGH, the additive. So there's a whole lot of different hormones, both natural and unnatural, that are being produced and put into that milk that then we are consuming way outside of normal parameters, not even mentioning that it's a different species.
Right.
Again, when you look at allergies and proteins, milk proteins, those are all different. So I know that's not the main purpose of this, but I do think it's important to touch on those things. And to me, draw what I feel is a much more significant correlation between issues in dairy versus the meat itself.
I can hear my vegan father now saying, I told you so.